Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera. I'm a journalist, a sociologist, and researcher. Today, hosting E.J. Saunders, who is the former Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance, Investment and Trade of the Turks and Caicos Islands. E.J., a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
EJ, you were part of a panel at the e-governance conference where basically we're doing a sort of like mini-series within this podcast because we are interviewing indeed you, but also like your fellows, let's say, during the panel that at the conference was called Switching on Enlightened Leadership. So obviously a little bit of an introduction to you for who was not tuning in, let's say, at the conference. You're a business leader, entrepreneur, but also indeed you have covered government roles and during your tenure you did have a very strong impact as well through and on digitalization in the islands. But I would actually start from giving listeners a little bit of context, let's say, in the sense, what does digitalization in the Turks and Caicos Islands mean? Because relatively small place, right? Relatively small population, but that doesn't make the needs, let's say, of the people over there potentially less digital.
No, it doesn't. The country is very small, but we are very close to America, and we get American television, and we fly to the United States very, very easily. We have multiple flights to the United States every day. And Miami, which is our main port of entry, is only about an hour and 15 minutes away by plane. And so what happens is that our people see what happens in the United States, and they want the same thing, particularly when it comes to digital, internet, mobile data, apps. They want exactly the same. And so it's become a quality of life issue in the sense that they want to buy things on Amazon. They want to be able to stream, use streaming services like Netflix. They want the same catalog of content. They want to consume information. They want the same way they do in North America. They want to upload videos to TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and those things. And so that's what digitalization means to them. It's no different from what they have inside in North America. And they expect that their government is going to make it easier for them to be able to do the same services as persons who live in the United States would do, or in North America. A lot of our persons are now, because we're a British colony, a lot of persons go to school in the United Kingdom. Some people are starting to live there temporarily. So it's the exact same. They're seeing what's happening in Europe, and they want those things. So digitalization for us in the Turks and Caicos is the exact same thing that it means in Europe and in North America. But it's our job as government to ensure that we create the type of environment that attracts the investment that persons will make to build out the infrastructure, like the mobile network, so you can get mobile data, you can get 4G, LTE, 5G data on your mobile phones, you can get terabytes of data to your home, you can get streaming services on your television, and we make sure that we do it in a way where it protects the public. So you're not just getting information from the internet that's toxic, that we're doing it in a responsible way from a government point of view.
EJ, I will give also like a further context, let's say, but specifically on you instead and your tenure as minister, because you have covered different roles as minister. Meaning, in 2021, from February to July, you were also Minister of Health and Human Services, and one of the main achievements, let's say, during that time was the fact that the active COVID-19 cases, it was the time of the pandemic, fell from basically over 400 in the islands to 0, I remember that, and as well, just following July 2021, from August 2021 till March of this year, 2024, you were Minister of Finance, Investment and Trade. As far as I understand, the topic of digitalization falls within the competence of that minister, no? Which also means something for the type of vision that you aim to develop in terms of digital transformation for the island. A vision that is quite connected, no, to topics of trade, investment, economic prosperity.
Yes, I mean, just to put in context for you, what happened is that when we won the government, we didn't have anyone with any health expertise. And so someone had to be the Minister of Health. And we were in a crisis. And so the government, the lead of the country, the premier, basically said, I want you to lead health to try to get things under control. At that point in time, vaccinations were low, COVID cases were high. And so we had an objective, and we were thankfully was able to achieve that objective pretty quickly and get it down to zero. And then I got moved to the ministry that I was always intended to get. And so because I have an IT background, and I became as a software engineer, I was the CEO just before getting into politics. I was the CEO of a mobile phone company. Mm-hmm. So as the tech minister, my goal was to set the vision, the digitalization vision for our ministry, our government as a whole, for our country, and to try to achieve those. And that is the reason why I'm here today, even though I'm not a minister currently, is to make sure that we're able to carry out that vision at the end of our government, because we're going to be having elections this year. So the computer department happens to fall under the Ministry of Finance. So that's why I inherited, but I probably would have gotten it anyway as the tech minister and the person most responsible for defining the tech and digitization vision for the government. And so the goal for me was to start with the national ID and try to create a country that did or is going to do in digitalization in the Caribbean what Estonia did for digitalization in Europe. We want to be the new Estonia, and we want to be the Estonia of the Caribbean. So when people look back, people are able to say the Turks and Caicos Islands went from nowhere and became the powerhouse in terms of digitalization, the same way that Estonia did it in Europe.
Yeah, because the fact is that one of the main I remember that like one of the main observations, at least from my point of view, that emerged especially from your panel discussion and also from talking to your fellows at the panel at the e-governance conference, I remember it's exactly the fact that lasting change lasts beyond the terms of politicians when they are in government or as ministers or serving as ministers. As I said, for example, as you have also mentioned, there are going to be elections this year, as in many other countries in the world, which I think it's a very topical theme for understanding where does digitalization go beyond the terms, let's say, of a leader that has a vision for digitalization. So what I would ask you, for example, in this sense is, obviously, during your tenure as minister, you did have priorities, you did develop a certain vision, and I am obviously assuming that you developed a vision that would go beyond you being in charge, let's say, of that minister or not. Could you share a bit, you spoke about the digital identity or like the national ID. Could you share a bit more of what were the priorities that you remember had been set or laid out, let's say, during your time as minister, and that do span, let's say, even beyond the time of potentially staying in charge as minister?
Thank you. If you think of digitization the way electricity was, many, many years ago, there must have been the minister somewhere talking about the exact same things you're talking about in terms of digitization, but electricity. Electricity was coming down the pipeline, and you must have had the podcast of 100 years ago, person saying, "Give me your vision for electricity." And they would probably say, we want electricity to be ubiquitous, we want everyone to have it, and we don't want people thinking about electricity as a service. It's a basic necessity. And you don't think about it anymore. You just know that it's a basic need. Everyone now has electricity in their home or piped water. Again, 100 years ago, when people started getting water to the homes, some minister would have had a vision around making sure that clean water was able to come to everyone's homes. It seemed like a brand new thing at the time, and they must have had a vision around it. Digitalization is no different. We're at the early-ish days of it, but at some point, 50 years from now, we wouldn't be thinking of digitalization as this big thing. We would treat it as a basic necessity, that everyone would have it, everyone would have connectivity to the internet. So that's the vision for me, just to prepare my country, the Turks and Caicos, where digitalization is ubiquitous. You don't think of it as a brand new service. It's just something that you can connect with you, particularly with your government and with each other through a digital means. And right now, for me, we don't have 24/7 government. And what I mean by that is that the public's interaction with government happens at a fixed time, between 10 in the morning and probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you can't interact with government anymore because the government is not online. And particularly on the weekend, if you have something to do with government, you have to rush there before the government offices closes, because you can't do business with government until the next business day. My goal and my vision is to ensure that government is available to the citizens 24/7. If you're in Estonia, you take it for granted, but it's a luxury to be able to do that in the Caribbean. So the big vision for me is, by the time I leave government, is that the citizens can interact with government at any time that they want to. So if a baby is born on a weekend in the evening, you can register that baby's birth as soon as the baby is born, and maybe have a passport or an ID for that baby by the next business day. You'd have your EID almost immediately. You'd have your physical ID by the time they could get it. That if you need to change locations, change apartments on the weekend, you can do so and then update your information, your contact information outside of those government working hours. So that's the big thing for me. The other thing is that I want to improve the government's customer service to its citizens, to make it easier for the citizens to interact with government, to participate in governing and helping to give their feedback to government, so government can take into consideration the wants and the needs of its people. And then for the business community to do business with government. And those things don't end at the end of a government term. Those things you want to build on, particularly as new technologies come down the pipeline. So the overarching vision for me is to ensure that government could, as I said at the conference, government's role, the overarching goal of government is to make today better than yesterday and tomorrow better than today for its citizens. And I want, as the tech minister, is to use my time there to make persons' lives better. So every day our citizens can live their best lives.
EJ, you just made me think of something by mentioning the topic of national EID, but also what you said in the beginning, that the fact that citizens in Turks and Caicos see obviously what's happening outside of Turks and Caicos, not just in the US, but also in the UK in terms of the services that are available and all that of the sort. Turks and Caicos in terms of population, is a relatively small country. I think there is, if I'm not wrong, there are less than 60,000 inhabitants, I think, in total.
Well, we're in the middle of our census right now, but I think you're right on. By the time it's done, it'll end up about a little less than 60,000.
So my question on this is there also any plan to break down, let's say, the borders and the barriers of the digital state of Turks and Caicos by making the digital solutions that you are developing within the country also interoperable with those of other countries outside of Turks and Caicos, so that also citizens and businesses through the digital ecosystem of your country could more easily access those of others as well? Because I remember that this was also quite a salient topic during the conference days, and the question comes to mind because I remember that many government representatives from many different parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, when talking about interoperability, they were talking about breaking down data silos within the country, but then also doing so outside of the countries, with other countries.
Well, we have to break down the data silos within the country immediately, because that's the only way we can offer better services, when systems can talk to each other. So that's a given. And to do that, we have to, the data that's in the silos have to speak the same language. Let's say for technical purposes, they have to subscribe to the same type of API structure so they can make it easier. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to follow international best practices. We want to be able to integrate with the wider community as quickly as possible. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't make sense for us to reinvent the wheel. So it's best to use the international standards. But that said, we don't want to be, as you would call, copy-paste government, our country, we want to become to a point where we become leaders in this field. Just as the same way as Estonia is setting the standards that other countries want to follow. So we would take, from a programming point of view, we will follow the open source model, the models that are we know that internationally that everyone's looking to, and the standards that everyone's contributing to. But we don't want to just be able to copy and paste it. At some point we want to start to lead. We're behind now, and we think that we'll be able to catch up in short order. And then once we catch up, we would want to be able to contribute to the conversation around the newer technologies. So as an example, if you follow technology, you would know a couple of years ago, blockchain was the big thing, and people would sit around talking about what's the standards around blockchain. Then cybersecurity became a big thing, and then we were sitting around contributing to the conversation around cybersecurity, and now it's AI. And so when the next big thing comes up, I would want the Turks and Caicos to be at the table to help shape what it's going to look like. But right now, as you said, we will adopt the international standards to make sure that our systems can speak the international technology language, whatever that is, and meet those standards. So when we plug into other countries, into the wider world, we know it will work right away. So our systems can talk to the system, or if we're going to join some other organization, let's just say the EU is an example in terms of our technologies, we know that our standards are already built on the same standards that they're following. So there wouldn't be any question marks around, or there wouldn't be a long transition period.
Yeah, because staying in the metaphor of like learning the language is exactly, the topic of like abiding to international standards. But the interesting thing, obviously, that I'm getting from you regarding the plans, let's say, of like Turks and Caicos is to also at some point contribute to the making of those standards by being one of those that can create new words, let's say, for these standards.
Exactly, because imagine Estonia adopting the international standards and let's just say those standards were developed by North America. Yes, your computer system would plug in, and yes, you'd be using the operating systems from North America, and all of a sudden, but when you start to deploy them, you'd realize that, wait a minute, it works, but it's not Estonian, it's not European, it's not Baltic. It doesn't have our culture, it doesn't have our flavor, it doesn't have our flair. It doesn't represent us. And then, even though you can use the technologies, you start to feel that it's trying to make we have a metaphor that says a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit exactly right. The only way to make it fit right is to be part of the development of it. To say, okay, when we do this, from an Estonian point of view, we would want it to look like this. We want the content to be this way. We want the content to sound this way. And then you start to get something that fits much better. So the Turks and Caicos is no less ambitious. I want at some point that our people are able to have a seat at the table to say, wait a minute, the content and the technology that we're consuming, while it works, it makes us fit to the technology. We want now content and technology that fit to us.
Very interesting point on this. And actually, considering, so I must admit that I have done something, let's say, during the governance conference, which was that in all the conversations that I had with the different guests and speakers at the conference, I tried to, with many of them, I tried to avoid a little bit the topic of artificial intelligence for one reason. Because in general, this is a moment in time, since you were also mentioning tech trends, and like the things that we happen to talk about at different moments in time. You mentioned blockchain exactly. I would say 4 even years ago, it was like a hot topic. Then we moved on to cybersecurity, and we moved on to cybersecurity also because we had to. International events such as, for example, Russia's aggression in Ukraine, or in any case the rise in like cyber threats and cyber attacks or cyber crime, then reshape the digital policy debate a bit more, focusing it on cybersecurity. Now, obviously, it's the moment of artificial intelligence. In order, obviously, to implement practices in artificial intelligence and large language models to actually serve the purposes of the government, to deliver better services for citizens, first, data centers, information systems need to be, tidy and in place, and data management must be there. But it seems that also opens up possibilities for certain countries to not have to catch up, let's say, to the narratives of other countries, because there is maybe a bit of a new phase starting up in terms of computing and in terms of using technology and the sort. And it sounds like you do have an idea on how artificial intelligence could be utilized, in to bring about digital transformation in the society and the economy at large. Have you had any thoughts about that also maybe were arising from conversations that you had at the governance conference of this year, or what's your take on this point?
It just happened that one of the few areas that I know well is AI, because it's something that I studied in university and something that's been working with for a long time. I'm a big supporter of AI. I mean, I have some concerns. The concern that I have around AI has nothing to do where people think it's going to take over the world and in terms of take over mankind. My concern is that right now, the way the large language models work requires a considerable amount of computing power, and that computing power takes resources, requires a considerable amount of resources around energy for cooling purposes and for powering the data centers. And so it taxes the environment far more than any other technology. And so data centers require more electrical power. They require more water for cooling purposes. So places that see the data centers around large language models have seen, those cities or towns have seen a drastic increase in the energy demands of the service providers, those who are building the models. So that's my huge concern. But in terms of the technology itself, so putting that concern aside, the Microsoft CEO said something when OpenAI first released ChatGPT, because Microsoft is their partner and the largest investor, and the first thing that they were thinking about putting the technologies from it was around search. So Microsoft rolled out Bing with the OpenAI technologies before they rebranded it around Copilot. They operated it into Bing, and they felt that now we will have an opportunity to increase the competitiveness of Bing compared to Chrome with Google. But the Microsoft CEO said something. He said, "This is the first day in a brand new race." And so what he was trying to say is that people didn't think about us before in terms of search. Now we're going to use this technology to increase our market share in terms of search, and that this is the first day now in a brand new race, and we're planning on winning that race. Now, outside of the things that they did outside of search, I think Bing is still not number one, but they were able to retool Microsoft around AI to become the largest company in the world today by market capitalization, so by market cap. As a country, AI for me, this is the first day in a brand new race. That now we have a brand new technology that small island nations like the Turks and Caicos can use to power us into becoming one of the foremost people in our region in terms of utilizing technology. We can utilize it to do the same thing that Estonia did years ago by coming from an unknown in Europe to becoming a place where people come to learn about it. Our goal is to do that. Our goal is to use, at least my goal, is to use that technology to make this the first day in a brand new race for Turks and Caicos, where we power all our services through it. For our financial services sector, that's very, very small, practically non-existent, to make our customer service, even around the tourism sector, better. And when I say the tourism, to make it easier for tourists to come, like I was walking through your National Museum in Tartu and using a card and switching from Estonian language to English just by flagging the card in front of it, and making it easy for me as a tourist, as a visitor to your country, to understand your history. Imagine us being able to do that for the tourist sector, that they're just being able to walk down and use augmented reality using their phone to put it in front of places in the Turks and Caicos and learn about it. We're going to use AI to do that. The language models that we use, we have to ensure though that we're not just adopting the language models from another country, because then it's trained on the culture of another country, the history of another country, the experiences of another country. We have to make sure that when we deploy them, that we're able to deploy them on our language models, our large language models, because then it becomes more reflective of who we are. But that's a technology issue, and we know now how to solve that, because that's where the open standards come from. To say, if you're going to plug in a language model, this is how you do it. So we are going to be following those standards, but we're going to make sure that the content are uniquely ours.
And I think that the technology issue that you just mentioned makes it as well all the more societal, because you mentioned in this case, but also like before answering another question, that that technology must reflect as well, the technology that is utilized, the standards that we are respecting must reflect as well the cultural context and the practices. Let's say you must identify with them a little bit, no?
Yes, I totally agree to that, yes.
And speaking of inclusion and also of private companies, another one of the at least the takeaways, in terms of collaboration and interoperability and bringing society together for lasting digital change that I remember I derived from the e-governance conference was exactly the topic of the public-private partnerships. No, it has been talked about a lot, and you also have, as you mentioned as well, a private company background, before like getting into government. In the case of Turks and Caicos, and in your experience there, could you maybe like share some examples of a public-private partnership where essentially there was the realization that government doesn't have to do it all alone when it comes to digital transformation, but that companies as well do not have to be kept outside, let's say, the perimeter of government, but can together make this like lasting societal change?
We are at very early stages yet, so we don't have any huge examples where the government and the private sector came together and collaborate. I would think the closest thing would be the fact that in terms of mobile data, when the phone companies came into the market, the penetration, there was very low smartphone penetration to around the world, including the Turks and Caicos. There was very low in terms of country penetration, in terms of data. And so we were probably matching globally, but certainly we didn't have 100% in terms of data services to the home, because we have some things that would be close to like rural communities. And so at that time, they would not have had fixed line to be able to service, to be able to provide them with data. And so our coverage, our data coverage across the country would have been, and when I say low, it probably wasn't the lowest in the world, but we certainly didn't have 100% data coverage across our population. And the government wanted to increase that, particularly, and governments around the world wanted to. They wanted to make sure that you're able to get internet to every home and every citizen. And a lot of big countries in the world don't even have 100% yet. It's getting better, but there's still some goals that says we want to increase the internet penetration across our communities. Particularly, it's the rural communities that lack that. And so people are looking at different technologies. But our mobile carriers, which I was the CEO of one of them, was able to follow the government standard and vision to get it to 100% of the population. And today, but in a relatively short period of time, when you consider it, the competition in the mobile sector first came to the Turks and Caicos in 2006. And between the two companies, today now we have 100% population coverage in terms of data services. And so you can get data now in every person's home, no matter where you are in the Turks and Caicos. And so that's one of those cases where the private sector followed the government recommendations and worked on them.
And that obviously plays in favor of the geography, let's say, of Turks and Caicos, because Turks and Caicos, I mean, just for context, exactly for everybody, it consists of, I think, about like 8 main islands, and
Yes,
then
yes.
about like 22, 25 smaller islands, I think.
I think that I should know the number better, but I think it's about 40. But I think these are, we call every little rock in the water an island, but it's 8 main islands, yes.
But it means having a sparse population over a geographical area where there is something in between the sea that obviously makes it a bit more difficult to deliver services effectively. And instead, mobile penetration, like mobile data and coverage and penetration, allows the government to actually get to citizens and the citizens to get to government. AJ, one last question to wrap up this episode. Thanks a lot for your contribution. But obviously, I have to ask you something about future plans. Meaning, if you were to look forward the next 3 to 5 years, so rather near future, let's say. I'm not speaking of like 20 years time. Also because I just remember, as we just said, 2 years ago, it's not like we were talking about artificial intelligence as much as we're talking about it now. So I will keep it in the near future. But in your opinion, what are some of the priorities or like main policy lines in the digital domain across government, so not necessarily limited to trade and investment, let's say, that Turks and Caicos should adopt or follow or maybe even create, let's say, to further advance in digital transformation and in digital development in the next 3 to 5 years? Briefly.
Well, the first thing, the issue that we have is that we have a lot of issues with immigration, illegal immigration, persons coming across our border and illegally. And because the communities of the illegal immigrants are so big, once you make it to shore, there's a high probability that you can integrate into your local, your community, the community of the illegal immigrants, and make it very difficult for government to find them. And so the solution for me is around the national ID, and that the national ID will break down the people who are in your country into 3 groups. It'll be the legal resident, and so every legal resident will have a national ID. The tourists who are there visiting, and they'll have their stamp in their passport to show that they are legally allowed to be in the country for a certain time. And then you'll have the illegals, because they can't show either the national ID or the stamp in their passport. And so that the national ID initiative for us will allow us to deal with our illegal immigrant problem, at least identify those who are there illegally and be able to reduce the problems with that. So that's one project that we expect to have fully rolled out, the national ID, and that it's critical to that. The other one around it for me is digitization and of the government, to make it available, government services available 24/7. I'm calling it 24/7 government. And so to improve the customer service that government provides to the public, particularly to its own citizens. So that's the next big project for us, is to digitize government services end to end, to make the interaction, make doing business with government to its citizens and to businesses a lot easier. And then I want to use AI to make that easier, to make it better to deal with government. And so in addition to being able to go to a government portal 24/7, but that you'd be able to interact with government chatbots as if you were dealing with a person face to face. And so AI is a big thing for me. I'm hoping that we can work with a partner, maybe Microsoft, using their Copilot technology, and work it right across government, and then integrate those with the social media apps that people are familiar with. So to speak with government, you don't have to go to www.government.turksandcaicos.com sort of thing. And I'm saying it that way to say how people do business now, that you would just go to your government contact in your WhatsApp or your Instagram or whatever, and then you chat with it. And so you're thinking that you're chatting with a government person. You're chatting with the government's chatbot, but then now you have a physical embodiment of government integrated into the tools that you're familiar with. And so you could just go there to your government contact and say, how do I do so and so and so and so? I want to be able to arrange for this. I want to get parking. And you're talking to it as if you're talking to your social media friend, but you're interacting with government services. So that's the vision for me over the next 3 to 5 years, to increase citizens' participation in government, but doing it in a manner using the tools that they are familiar with.
Wonderful. EJ Saunders, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
And thanks a lot also to all our audience for tuning into another episode of the Digital Government Podcast. And that's it also from me, your usual host, Federico. Tune into the next one and have a good day.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.